there's none of those kind of things. But we're on a highway to Zion today. Okay, it's poetry in motion. It's poetry on the way. It's poetry on the move. And it's a story of contrast, because in this story of contrast, you don't start just on the highway. You start before the highway. So we'll move into the contrasts that are there in Isaiah 34. So before you get to 35, which is what I'm preaching on this Sunday, you start with Isaiah 34, and there are a bunch of contrasts there. You see barrenness out there in the desert, and then suddenly the desert bursts into bloom. Sometimes they would have those rain showers and the desert that seemed barren. There was life beneath it, and the rain showers would come and new life would bloom. There's a story of contrast, that the blind would receive sight, the deaf would hear, and the speechless would sing for joy. And we hear these terrible words of judgment on the nations from Isaiah 34. So you don't really get the feeling of Isaiah 35 and the joy that comes from it unless you hear the pain of 34. So just take a look at this. Draw near, O nations, to hear, O peoples, give heed. Let the earth hear and all that fills it, the world and all that comes it. The Lord is and furious, and he has doomed them with slaughter. Their slain will be cast out, and the stench of their corpses. And that just make you, glad to get up in the morning. I mean, this is the pain that the people have gone through. They have been in exile somewhere between 48 and 70 years. These people have probably been in exile for just right at about 40 years. You probably lost a generation of people. There are only a few really strong people who've survived this time in a foreign land under foreign oppression. And now they are taking this long walk back. And on this long walk back, this is what they experience. This is how they experience the pain. All the host of heaven shall rot away. All their hosts shall wither like a leaf. And then the next slide, they're doomed to judgment. The Lord has a sword, and it's sated with blood. The land shall be soaked with blood. And I did a lot of things back at Easter talking about Ukrainian Easter celebrations. I don't know if anybody remembers that. And this is what it must, I think the Ukrainian people must be feeling these kind of feelings right now in a war-torn country. It pains me. I was thinking, do I need to talk about Ukrainian Christmas and what the Ukrainian Christmas traditions? I never thought at Easter that we would still be having these discussions. I was hopeful that something would be resolved, but the pain continues, and a once beautiful country is ravaged by war, and you can see the pain of someone just kind of walking down the street that looks like she walked down before. And so this is the pain that they're feeling. And the pain of Isaiah 34 goes on. For the Lord has a day of vengeance, a day of vindication. Edom will be turned into pitch, her soil into sulfur, her land will become burning pitch, and it will be from generation to generation. It shall lie waste. And it's going to be so bad, we're going to call it no kingdom there. The thing's going to be totally wiped out. And there'll be thorns and thistles and nettles, and it shall be the haunt of jackals. Isn't that exciting for the morning? Great way to start your day. But I think that, and then it talks about the wildcats. And then finally in 16, it said there's a little bit of a shift. It says, seek and read from the book of the Lord. Not one of these things shall be missing. None shall be without a mate. For his mouth it has commanded, and his spirit has gathered them. He has cast the lot for them. His hand has portioned it out to them with the line. They shall possess it from generation to generation. They shall live it. So there's a little bit of hope there at the end of 34, but basically what Isaiah 34 is trying to set up is that the world is a mess. I mean, things are terrible. This week, my mother called, and my mother had gotten an email or a phone call or a text message that her Amazon package had not been delivered, except she had not ordered an Amazon package. And so she called the number that called her, and then she realized there might not be something, there may be something fishy about this. And so she called my wife and said, what did I order on Amazon? And Amazon basically said, or my wife basically said, you don't have an Amazon account. Your granddaughter is your Amazon junkie. She's the one that your pusher. If you need something, you can go through your granddaughter. But, that's the kind of world that we live in, preying on, older people. The world is a mess. And that's what Isaiah is trying to show us. And it's not hard for us to see. And then we think about Scrooge this week, and his life is a mess. And he doesn't really see it. He doesn't really see the pain, or maybe he does, but he's just gotten so numb to it. He's just gotten so used to it that he needs a wake-up call. And you remember the Ghost of Christmas Past came to him, and he was quite resistant. But when the Ghost of Christmas Present comes to him, he's a little more open because his eyes have begun to be open. But I think for Scrooge and for the people who were suffering in a strange land, who had been exiled, were through desert days. And they were asking the question in those desert days, what will it be like when God rescues us? What is the possibility? What is it going to be like when God rescues us? And so that's when we get to our scripture for this week. It's a highway of hope. Isaiah 35. It's a highway of hope and possibility. Now, it's a long way. I want to show you a picture here. Matt would be proud that I've got several maps here today. And so the first one is where they're taken away by the Assyrians. And then the second one is where they're taken away to Babylon. It's even further. Go back one, sorry, Andy. So the top one up there is where they're taken to Assyria. And that's not quite as far as being taken all the way over to Babylon. I tried to put it in a modern day context, if you'll turn there for a second. The next one. It's a 1,000-kilometer, almost 1,100-kilometer walk. And does that look like a great place to walk through? It doesn't seem like the greatest place to walk through. It looks like it's almost all desert, doesn't it? Looks like a terrible, barren, dry place. And this is where these words come from. They're walking through a desert time. It's like the first Exodus. They walk through mostly desert as well. They wander for 40 days to be able to find their way. And I've got a picture of what that first walk would have looked like. That was only 726 kilometers. So this Exodus walk is 400 kilometers more. And some of them are 50 years older than they were the first time they made that walk. Can you imagine having to make your way back 50 years later? When you're 20, it's one thing making that walk. When you're 70, it's probably a different feeling. And here's the walk that they made, and mostly that's through dry and barren areas. I was trying to give some context for what that would be like today and what it would be like for us to make that walk. So in honor of Paul Roseman, I figured out that it's like walking to Shreveport. Okay? So if you walk from Atlanta to Shreveport, it's 1,119 kilometers. So it's just a little further to Shreveport, but I took you up through Memphis instead of down through Jackson. What's that? You get to go. You don't have to go through Arkansas. You get to go through Arkansas. Okay, fair enough. You get to go through Arkansas if you go that way. But look how green that is compared to the other way. Look at the how lush an area that we live in compared to what they were walking through. And in the midst of that desert time is when we come to Isaiah 35. In 538 BC, they've probably been taken away with the destruction of Jerusalem back at the turn of the 598. And then the leader of the people there in Babylon has the idea. Cyrus the Great says, let them go home. Let the people go home. And he is often, he's referred to in Isaiah as the anointed one. And when we talk about the anointed one, who do we usually think about? Jesus, the Messiah, right? But they talk about Cyrus as the one who proclaimed release to the captives. He actually does this. He doesn't necessarily do recovery of sight to the blind, but he does release to the captives, and he allows the people to go free. And that freedom is a beautiful thing for them to be able to come home. And I think about that wonderful hymn, come home, ye who are weary, come home. They have to have been worn out but there's some great expectation as they make their way back across the desert. And that takes us to our scripture text for today. Questions, comments, things you want to say in public? I think that his picture of the world, it was in the trade route. I mean, the Jerusalem, the Israel, Judah is in the midst of the trade route to the sea. So if you have that barren area from where you live, you're trying to get to the sea. And some of the things I think they thought needed to be rebuilt, but they'd seen what the easy answer is. God finally is like, Cyrus, you need to let him go. So I think that they had suffered long enough. They had learned their lesson in captivity. And so I think God kind of eases up on the brake and opens the door, and Cyrus becomes God's vessel, that God works through Cyrus. But I also think that, he saw these people with a longing to go home in his kingdom, and so he let them go back home. They sent a lot of people back to where they had taken them from. I don't know if it was becoming a burden on their economy. Who knows what it was, but they finally decided, John, to let people go home to wherever they had brought them from. So I don't know the mind of Cyrus at that point, but I think in the mind of God, it was time they perhaps had learned their lesson. And we really have 4 returns. I mean, this is the first of the returns. There's a return under Nehemiah. There are 4 returns over the next sort of 80 years as people make their way back. So this is not the first time. This is the first time, but it's not the last time that they let people go back home. And they've got to go back home with a heightened expectation of what it's going to be like. They've been told by their grandparents, they've been told by everyone, this is going to be great when you get to go back home. And when they get back home, it is nothing like they thought. But as they're walking, these are the words that give them hope. So we turn to Isaiah 35, the return of the redeemed to Zion. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall, put that on your faces, rejoice. Look at your neighbor, rejoice. Yeah, there's a little bit of rejoice out there. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus. Any Yankees here? 1, a couple of y'all admit it. 2, okay, it's just a few of y'all. For us in the north, the crocus was the most hopeful sign because it can break through the ice and the snow. And we knew that even though it didn't feel like spring where we grew up, it was the beginning of spring when the crocus made its way up through the snow. It was always a wonderful sign, like the crocus. Now, it's not really a crocus in the scripture, and I'll show you what that really is in the scripture. It's a chava zealot. I don't know if I said that right or not, but it's a desert flower that blooms. But the translators made it the crocus, which I guess is easier for us to relate to, like the crocus. It shall blossom abundantly and, come on, rejoice with joy and shouting. The glory of Lebanon shall be given it. And, the Lebanon was known for its cedars. Lebanon was known for the beauty of the region. And so the glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord and the majesty of God. So you go from the glory of the natural creation and you move to the glory of God. There's this kind of movement in this passage that you see glory in creation, and that should move you to see an even more glorious work of God. And you imagine the desert moving into bloom. You may have seen that here in this country, where the desert springs into bloom, even when it looks like there's nothing there. We see signs of our spring. I talked about the crocus coming up out of the snow. It's always a beautiful thing. And things will burst forth in the desert. And here's their version of the crocus, the chavasalet. It bubbles up in the desert and becomes a beautiful flowering plant there in the desert. And that seems to be the word in the Hebrew. And then it says, strengthen the weak knees. Anybody have weak knees? I think we have to do squats to get a sense of this one. Get up, stand up. Okay. And this is, how do you strengthen weak knees? Come on. You got that? Can you hear the noises that we make as that happens? To strengthen, I won't make you do this on Sunday, okay? But strengthen the weak hands, make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are a fearful heart, be strong and do not fear. I have to believe that there were many older adults trying to make this trek back home. And as those older adults were trying to make this trek back home, they needed to hear these words, that God would strengthen their weak hands, that God would make firm their feeble knees. It gives this a different context when you think about somebody who's been gone from home for 50 years. They're at least 50 years old if they're not, and 50 in those days was, probably 70 or 80 today, right? I mean, you probably lived a very hard life. And God is saying to the people, and Isaiah is saying to the people, God's going to strengthen your weak hands. God's going to make firm your feeble knees, and say to those with a fearful heart, be strong and do not fear. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. And there's some questions about the translation here, that it's not about as much, it's more like he will come with justice as opposed with vengeance. He will make things right. He will turn things over. It's not as much as vengeance in this part of the passage as it is with justice. And so it is a beautiful image that God will strengthen the weak hands. You think about some of the weak hands that you've experienced in your life, people that you love and whose hands have gotten weakened and maybe even gnarled over the years. What a beautiful image that God is going to strengthen our weak hands and make firm our feeble knees. Anybody had knee surgery? Just a few. And now you can get a new one. What would those people have done if they knew that after, time in exile, they could get a new knee? But I'm sure they worked out hard and over the years. And then finally you hear this word then. Like last week, the word was shall, and shall is still here. But you get this transitional word, then the eyes of the blind shall be opened and the ears of the deaf shall be opened. Then the lame shall leap like a deer and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For waters will break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. They're walking through the desert and they're hearing these words of hope and possibility, trying to remind them to keep their heads up, to keep looking for what God is going to do, because when you are in those desert times in life, you tend to look down. You tend to look down at your shoes. You tend to look down at all the pain and all the struggle. And God is trying to say, look up, look up. There's possibility. For your waters shall break forth. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. The haunts of jackals shall become a swamp, and the grass shall become reeds and rushes. And so the desert is transformed into a marsh. And it's hard for them to even believe that, but that is Isaiah's promise to bring them hope, to bring them joy, to help them as they're making a long journey. How can God help us as we're making a long journey, but to remind us of God's providence, God's possibility, and what God will bring? And they have been walking this dusty road, and as they're walking this dusty road, God through Isaiah says, a highway shall be there, and it shall be called the holy way. The unclean shall not travel on it, but it shall be for God's people. No traveler, not even fools, shall go astray. Isn't that hopeful to you? Not even fools shall go astray, Fran. Not even foolish Falcon fans shall go astray. You have to believe. You have to believe. There is hope. There's hope that the Steelers could actually have a winning season. It'd be the first time. Tomlin's never had a winning season, but we're almost 5-7, so that should tell you that with 5 to go or 4 to go, I don't know, we're terrible. A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the holy way. The unclean shall not travel on it. No lion will be there. There won't be any predators along the way. No ravenous beast shall come upon it. They shall be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. and the ransom of the Lord shall return and come to Zion singing. Everlasting joy shall be on their heads. That's my favorite verse from this. Everlasting joy will be on their heads. And you'll learn more about that on Sunday. And they shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. Things are bad. The world is a mess. They have been gone from home for 50 years, and now they're slowly making their way back across the desert, and they're singing these songs, they're reciting these poems of hope to help strengthen their hands and their knees to be able to give them the strength to get back home. So I have some questions for you to think about as you think about your own journeys. Do you travel for Christmas, or do you stay here? Why? Do you take the time to cultivate joy in your life, whether you're feeling happy or not? Is joy an important foundation of your life, and where do you find it? Where have you seen joy in recent days? How have you spread joy recently, and how might you share joy in the days ahead? And what would the ghost of Christmas present show you about your life today that might need to change? Got it?